we'll push it. Okay. Okay, what we're going to discuss right now and what we're going to work on for a few days is the distributive property. The distributive property is one of the most major things you need to know in algebra, because that's where most people miss problems, is because they do not understand the importance of the distributive property. So here's what the distributive property says. It says if I'm taking some number times the sum or the difference, which is plus or minus in here, I can take this one times this one, plus or minus this one times this one. Now, I'm going to do this a little differently than most other people do, and that's because I have found that this keeps more of the numbers, of the signs correct. So on this first one, we're going to take 4 times 8 plus 2. Now, notice here I kept the 4 plus 2 in the center. I am taking this 8, I'm multiplying it by 4. I'm also multiplying this 2 by 4. So what do I get here? I get 32, 4 times 8 is 32, plus 8. And 32 plus 8 is 40. On the next one, we have 7 minus 4. Notice I wrote down the 7 minus the 4. I'm going to multiply this 7 by this 7, and I'm going to multiply this 4 by this 7. So 7 times 7 is 49, minus 28, which gives us 21. On the next one, notice that I have written in the middle 5 minus 2. I'm going to multiply this 5 by negative 4. I'm also going to multiply this 2 by negative 4. When I take negative 4 times 5, I get a negative 20. Now, when you're working here, this 2 has this sign, and you have to take that into consideration. You're going to take negative 2 times negative 4, which is a positive 8. And when we take negative 2 plus 8, we're going to get a negative 12. On the next problem, we have we take the 9 minus 3. It doesn't matter that this is behind that. We're still multiplying negative 2 times everything inside of this. We put the 9 minus 3 down first. Now we're going to multiply this 9 by negative 2. We're going to multiply this 3 by negative 2. When I take negative 2 times 9, I get negative 18. Again, this is not just 3. This is a negative 3 times a negative 2, which is a positive 6. When we take negative 18 plus 6, we get a negative 12. The next problem, we're going to put the 9 plus 4 down. Now we're going to multiply this 9 by negative 1. We're going to multiply this 4 by negative 1. We take negative 1 times 9, we get negative 9. We take positive 4 times negative 1, we get a negative 4. And we put a negative 9 minus 4 in our calculator, we will get a negative 13. Now we're changing out of the numbers here. We're putting in y plus 2. So we're going to take and put down our y plus 2. When we multiply 5 times y, we won't need a parentheses and we won't need a time sign. Just put the 5 in front of the y. Now we're going to take this 2 and also multiply it by that 5. So we get 5y plus 10. And you cannot do anything with that answer. That is your answer. On number 7, we're going to take this negative 6. Notice I wrote the x minus 5 down first. Then I'm multiplying that x by negative 6. I'm also going to take this negative 6 times that negative 5. So I'm going to take this also. Now I get a negative 6x, and a negative 5 times a negative 6 is a plus 30. So this is my answer. I cannot add these. They're not alike. On the next one, don't let it confuse you that r plus 3 comes first. We are multiplying everything in that by a negative 5. So I'm going to take this negative, notice I wrote the r plus 3 down first. I'm going to take this negative 5 times that r. Then I'm going to come back here and multiply this by a negative 5. We get a negative 5r. We take a positive 3 times a negative 5, and we get a negative 15. On the next one, there is not a number here on your notes. You can put a 1 in there. And you can take notice I put the negative in plus 7, and I put this in parentheses because of the negative sign here. I'm going to multiply that by negative 1 and multiply this also by negative 1. A negative 1 times a negative n gives us a positive 1n. 1 times anything is the same thing, so we can just write down n or 1n. We take a positive 7 times a negative 1. We get a negative 7. So our answer is n minus 7, or 1n minus 7. Notice again I put down the x plus 9 first. I'm going to multiply everything inside of this by negative 6. I put my negative 6 out here in front of the x. That's okay without a multiplication sign. And I multiply the 9 by negative 6. I get a negative 6x. I'm taking a positive 9 times a negative 6. That gives me negative 54. On the next one, when I wrote down my negative x, I'm multiplying it, so I put a parentheses around it, minus 3. This is what is inside of this. Now I'm going to take negative 4 times that negative x, and negative 4 times that negative 3. So I multiply both of these by negative 4. A negative times a negative gives me a positive 4x. A negative 3 times a negative 4 gives me a positive 12. On the next one, notice I wrote down my n minus 12. I'm going to multiply this by 3, and I'm going to multiply this by 3. So I get 3n. Now I'm taking a negative 12 times a positive 3, and that gives me a negative 36. So my answer is 3n minus 36. The next one is actually easier because we're just taking 3 times x, which gives me 3x, and 3 times y, which gives me plus 3y. On the next one, remember that a negative out here actually has a 1 there. So there's a 1 there if there's a number in front of that. So we're going to take a negative 1 times x minus y. Here's my x minus y. I'm going to multiply the x by negative 1. And I'm going to multiply my y by a negative 1. When I take a negative 1 times a positive x, I get a negative x. When I take a negative y times a negative 1, I get a plus y. And that is the end of the distributive notes.